My father blamed my sister for my mother's death, and now that she calls me daddy, he regrets everything. I'm a 24-year-old male, and the older brother to my 5-year-old sister. For privacy's sake, I'll refer to her as Belle for some background. My parents had me as teenagers. They were 15 and 16 at the time, and even as a kid I could always feel that they regretted having me. After I was born, both my mother and father were practically disowned by their families. My mother had to drop out of high school to take care of me, while my father worked 2 jobs just to provide, and even then they couldn't afford a home. They lived with my mother's older sister until I was 9, and my father got his GED and managed to get a better job and move us out. Despite the fact our living situation was better, it was clear to me that they believed their lives were ruined because of me. Whenever I misbehaved like any normal child, they'd use the fact that they gave up their lives for me and I still had the audacity to behave like this. And even when I never misbehaved, they never treated me with much love. I barely got to get new clothing. They'd get my clothes from Goodwill and practically refused to get me anything nice unless they had 2 birthdays, parties, meeting friends, and their wedding. My birthdays were always celebrated with a bare minimum. They'd get me a cupcake and a single gift, nothing that I wanted. Despite everything, I was still a child who just wanted their love. But as I grew older, I began to accept I wouldn't get it and made peace with that. I guess somewhere along the line, when my parents realized, I gave up on them. As throughout my teen years, they, mainly my mother, began to treat me better. But at that point, I wasn't the child who begged for their love anymore. I never received the love of my parents, and I wasn't asking for it anymore. Although I can't say I kept hating them. In fact, I began to feel neutral towards them. In my eyes, we were practically strangers. I never got to know them truly, as they raised me with the bare minimum, and never had any real conversations with me and never spent any quality time with me. They also knew nothing about me, so suddenly trying to play parents with me was awkward to say the least. When I was 18, my mother got pregnant, and I guess that was when they gave up on trying to fix things with me, as they could have a new child to start over with. They didn't treat me poorly again, but instead it felt like we were strangers living in the same home. When I turned 19, my mother gave birth to a girl, but due to some complications, she didn't end up surviving. This crushed my father. Not only did he begin to resent me for not being as sad as he was over her death. She was barely a mother to me, so there wasn't much to be sad over, but he also blamed his daughter for unaliving his wife. He was never home after the incident, and I was left taking care of my sister. I ended up having to take a break from college after the time I came home from my classes, to my sister screaming with hunger in an unchanged diaper while my father was out drinking. I took care of Belle full-time and called out my father multiple times, but he always got angry and ended the convo with him saying I could always leave Belle at the fire station. I eventually gave up on forcing him to be a father. Despite everything, I truly loved Belle. She was the sweetest and cutest kid. She was almost always smiley and surprisingly slept through the night. Once she was old enough, I enrolled her in daycare and continued my education while working night shifts. I always made sure to leave a good portion of afternoons empty so I could spend time with her. She always knew who her actual father was, and as she grew older, she began to try and spend time with him. I guess as she began to follow him around the house. Of course, that quickly ended after he blew up on her and she began to fear him. I realized she saw me as a parental figure despite the fact she knew I was her brother. When she was old enough for preschool, I found out she was telling people I was her father. I never mentioned it to her and just let it be until she gave her Father's Day card she made in preschool to me. My wife told me to choose between her or my mom, so I chose divorce. My mom and dad were both orphans. My dad died 2 weeks before I was born, and my mom didn't really have a support system, so we were just the 2 of us. I never lacked anything because my mother worked all her life to give me the life I have today, and didn't even have time for herself to start a new life again. She did all the little jobs possible so that we didn't miss anything. She deprived herself of food to give me food. I had very good clothes while she had none. I saw her make sacrifices again and always with a smile. Frankly, I always thought she was an angel dressed in a human body. The only time she yelled at me was when I was 16, when I saw her getting sick and working at the same time. I wanted to help her by finding a job, but she was angry and told me it was not my job to take care of her, and it was up to her to take care of me. She wanted me to get really good grades to get into the best universities because it was the only way I can protect myself when she can't anymore. Even at university, she didn't want me to work. I had to be focused on my studies, but she wanted me to volunteer so that I could be an adult who could do something with his hands. I met my wife there while both of us were volunteering. My wife is a good person, but she was never close to her parents or her siblings. Yet she adored my mother since she met her. There were times when I thought she loved my mother more than she loved me, and we laughed about it. Deep down, I think she was looking for the bond between mother and daughter that she did not have from her mother. When I finished my studies, I found a job and we moved in together, but she wasn't comfortable that I call my mom every day. Mind you, those were 10 to 15-minute calls, but eventually she stopped bringing it up. 2 years later, I bought a house for my mother because we never had a house in our name. We lived from apartment to apartment. So for all the sacrifices she made, it was for me the least of it, and it was non-negotiable. That's where the problem started with my wife. She wanted me to think about us first. I told her my dream had always been to buy my mom a house since I was little, and that's what I had to do, but she complained about it to my mom. My mom didn't even know I bought a house for her, as it was supposed to be a surprise for her birthday. She was uncomfortable receiving the house because of my wife and told me that wasn't necessary, and that we could use it for us when we get married. I was furious. I told my mother that the house was for her, and that she could do with it whatever she wanted, but it was time for her to think about herself first. Our relationship survived that. We got married and then we had our own house. Our life was going well until 2 months ago when my mother fell ill. I wanted her to come and live with us so that I could take care of her, but my wife didn't want to. I then decided to rent an apartment with my own money right next to our house so that I could be close to her and go there to take care of her. But even that idea didn't sit well with my wife. Me and my wife don't have children yet. We both work. I usually come home at 6 p.m., but since my mother is sick, I go to see her and come home at 8 p.m. on weekends. I see her for 1 or 2 hours, and the rest of the time I spend with my wife. We go on dates. I always accompany her in her hobbies, even though she never went to mine. 2 days ago, she told me that she thought about it and she thinks I prioritize my mother too much. She told me that I had to choose between my mother and the life I want to build with her. The truth is that I never made her feel that way. We both work, but I'm the one who cooks and I pay a person to do the housework. I make sure I do the dishes she likes. She didn't even know what I like to eat because I never complain. I run her baths, give her massages, flowers. I write her poems that I hide somewhere in the house for her to find out. We go on a trip 1 weekend a month. I earn much more money than her. I told her to keep her money for herself and I take care of all the bills, even hers. I always make sure to listen to her and consider her opinion. And I think I'm easygoing because I can change my mind to accommodate hers. But I realize that she tries to completely dominate me, and the only subject where I don't give her a choice is my relationship with my mother. So there, I'm going to have a talk with her and put some very clear boundaries. If she doesn't want to, well, we're going to divorce. My husband missed our daughter's birth, so my brother convinced him I was dead. My husband refused to answer my calls while I was in labor, and my brother played a horrible prank. Now my husband is furious. I won't cut him off. My husband and I got in a fight prior to my daughter's birth a week ago, when he casually suggested a paternity test for our daughter when she was born. To be clear, this was completely out of the blue with no warning or reason. I'm a homebody who works remotely with no male friends other than my brother. I told him that he was accusing me of infidelity, and he said he just wanted to be sure, and kept bringing it up until I told him, after 3 days of him asking and the stress starting to make me physically ill, that I didn't want to talk to him and left to my brother's house. I called him while I was gone and tried to work it out, but he refused. After all this, I went home the next day to grab some things while he was at work, and I went into labor. I called him 16 times, before calling my brother, who called him another half a dozen times himself while on the way to pick me up and then on the way to the hospital. It was a horrible and traumatic birth. I started crowning in the car, and the doctor delivered my daughter in the back of my brother's van because I was too far along to move me, before rushing me in when I kept bleeding. It was horrible. I hated it all. My brother's wife, who is a nurse, even told me she honestly thought I wouldn't make it. I also opted for a hysterectomy as it came to that, or something more dangerous. I only ever wanted one or none, but my husband wants a large family. I'm not that great with kids and actually never saw me having children my whole life. I'm trying to bond with my daughter, but it's been hard. The point is that during this while I was returning from surgery, 10 hours after I called, my husband finally responded and asked why I hadn't answered his call. However, my brother had my phone and was so angry that he said, "This is her brother, I'm at the hospital. She didn't make it," and turned it off. My husband rushed over and got there when I had just woken up and started shouting until the security forced him out, and then didn't get to see our daughter until the next day because I was mostly asleep and apparently they needed my signature to allow him back. My sister-in-law thinks it was horribly cruel but that he deserved it. But my brother stands by his prank and says that he only gave my husband 10 minutes of the same fear he had felt at my side for over 10 hours. Whenever he sees my husband, he also keeps telling him that I nearly died because we waited for him. My brother used to be mostly indifferent to my husband, but now he absolutely hates him. You can see it in his face whenever my husband enters the room. And he's been visiting a lot because he doesn't trust my husband to care for me while I'm still healing. My husband is furious that he won't apologize and that I won't make him, and yelled at me when I said that the only reason my brother had my phone was because he wasn't there. I am trying to be empathetic. I know he feels guilty. I've spoken to my therapist and she says the apathy I'm feeling is likely general and not solely focus on him from lingering shock from the trauma. But didn't say much about the prank. My mother-in-law has been texting me to say that my family is horribly cruel for the prank and that I should go no contact with my brother, and now my husband is saying the same. I just don't know what to do. I'm not in a good headspace. It's been hard to be in the same room with my husband, and I've been sleeping in the guest room with my daughter. He brought up the paternity once, and I just exhaustedly told him to either get out of my face or go stay with his mom if he's planning on stressing me out even more. I got my sister's bully deported. My sister was bullied relentlessly in high school for something she had literally zero control over, a certain part of her anatomy. Without going into details, she felt terrible about it, and it more or less ruined her life as an insecure 15-year-old girl. The girl was responsible for most of the cruel bullying, and the one who gave her a particularly cruel nickname related to her physical issue was called Nadia. Nadia was a foreign exchange student at our school. Nadia was beautiful, she was cruel, and she didn't give any FCKs about anyone but herself. I wasn't Miss Popular myself, but I had to protect my sister from having her life ruined, and I felt a very strong urge to get back at her tormentors. They say to kill a dragon with many heads, you gotta cut off the main head. So that's what I did. I learned that the father of Nadia was very conservative. Her whole family back home was. So I started spreading rumors about her being very promiscuous and ensured these rumors reached the family she was staying with. This apparently caused her some trouble, but I wasn't done. I threw a party one night when my parents were gone. I invited Nadia, who gladly came as I was a cooler older girl somehow, and she never said no to a chance to get hammered. Because yes, there was a lot of liquor. I made sure of that. Took pictures of everyone drinking and having fun. That same night when everyone left, I put it on my Facebook and tagged Nadia on it. She had this option turned on where everything she is tagged in is automatically allowed on her timeline. So a picture of her hammered and very skimpily dressed made its way to her page. Because of it being the middle of the night, she must not have noticed until the next day in the morning, so it stayed on for hours. But due to her parents' time zone being vastly different, I was sure they would see it before she had a chance to take it down. They did. She was gone the next week from school and flown back to her home country. Apparently her parents had to save her from being corrupted or something, so she was gone. My sister was safe from ridicule as word of my involvement spread, and let's just say people didn't really want to mess with her after seeing how far I was willing to go to protect my little sister. Today I messed up by cheating with my coworker and planning to run away together. I work in international live events that take weeks to pull off. I typically coordinate them and work with a team to install and operate. I'm close with my coworkers, but we live across the world and fly into every event. I've met most of my coworkers in person, but at this event we had someone new working sound, Clint. I'd seen him in Zoom calls, but we hadn't interfaced directly. This event was a big one for the company, a big headliner and big partners with a lot of money being tossed around. I arrived at the install, got caught up to speed, met Clint, and got to work. One by one, my coworkers were sent off to other events. Clint and I were left to finish everything up, but bad weather and huge letdowns by one of our vendors had us in hot water. We started working 15 to 20-hour days to get everything done on time. After our long haul days, Clint and I would hang out and blaze. Legally, we had a lot in common. And we were vibing like neither of us had felt before. We were both married, unhappily. His wife had a bunch of medical problems and was really good at spending money and never leaving school. My husband had turned into an angry person, had built up a pile of debt, and was not putting anything into the relationship. It started out platonic, but things got extremely stressful, and our intimate tension started building up. The lack of sleep, stress, and my lower tolerance for Zaza left me questioning everything about my life. We both felt like the other person was an extension of ourselves. We were kindred spirits. Slowly, Clint started making moves, and suddenly dinners were turning into dates, and we were hanging out in each other's hotel rooms. We crossed many lines, but right as we crossed the final line, my brain kicked back in, and we decided to take care of our lives before going further. Over the last few days at the event, Clint and I continued to be close. We made plans to leave our spouses, sell our houses, and travel together. We created a bucket list of places to go, things to do, and see together. We even talked about eventually building a little cabin. Clint had planned on getting a tattoo dedicated to me when he returned home. At the end of the event, we went our separate ways and kept in touch virtually. Lots of dirty texting and unprofessionalism all around. We had agreed we wouldn't tell our partners about the affair, as they each have mental health issues, but we planned to divorce and move on with our lives. After a few days at home, I talked with my husband and asked for a divorce. I told him I wanted to move away and start my life over. Clint talked to his wife, but things were messier. She was volatile, and her family made it difficult for Clint to outright leave her. Eventually, I noticed Clint was becoming distant, still intimate, but not as emotionally available. He sent me pictures of his new tattoos, which were nothing like what he had said he was planning for me. Alarm bells were going off in my head, but I kept plodding along, planning mine and our escape. Clint went off to a series of anniversary-related dates with his wife and kept leaving me on read. I asked him what was going on a number of times. Finally, after weeks of mixed signals, Clint told me he was having doubts. We video chatted during work, and he told me he owed it to his wife to try and make things work. Now, I'm left to pick up the pieces of my life. Most of my friends are my coworkers, so I have no one to talk to about my heartbreak. I don't have the money to fix my problems at home or to leave and live alone in another country. There's no going back with my husband, as I know it would be wrong and I'm no longer interested in carrying the relationship. I'll see Clint again in a few weeks at another event, where we'll likely be left alone for hours at a time. But he plans to stay faithful to his wife, and we never even got to have the mind-blowing lovemaking we talked about. Another event where we'll likely be left alone for hours at a time, but he plans to stay faithful to his wife, and we never even got to have the mind-blowing lovemaking we talked about. My boyfriend took his shirt off in front of me for the first time. It changed our lives. My boyfriend and I have been together for 8 months, and he has been hesitant to take his shirt off around me. He was S8 by one of his uncles from the age of 9 until he was 13 years old, and the trauma he has is still there. He never took his shirt off as a kid and gets really uncomfortable when people touch him. He didn't let me hug him or hold his hand the first month we were together. The first time he asked for a hug, I nearly cried. He is the most handsome man in the world and has the biggest heart imaginable. I'm happy to be his girlfriend. He is really into fitness and goes to the gym almost every day. He started working out when he was 15 as a way for him to take back control of his body, and he really enjoys it. He struggles with anxiety and considers me and the gym his safe spaces. He has a really nice body and works hard to maintain his physique. Last night he came to my apartment and was complaining about being sore. We were laying on my bed watching TV, and he kept moving around and trying to get comfortable. He fell down some stairs 2 months ago and sprained his AC joint. Yesterday was the first time he has been able to work out that shoulder. He was really uncomfortable, so I asked him if I could rub and massage it for him. He shut the idea down initially. However, I assured him that he was safe with me and I would not do anything to him he didn't want. He was still unsure but said he wanted to take this step with me. I offered to take my shirt off with him, and after a minute of reassurance he agreed. We took off our shirts and he looked so beautiful. He moved up in front of me and I began rubbing his shoulders. He flinched at first but relaxed and said it was helping. He asked me not to touch his lower back, so I stayed around his shoulders and neck. I massaged his shoulders for about a half hour and told him all the things I love about him, and he was so calm and relaxed. He spent the night, and when I woke up this morning he was in between my arms. We didn't go to sleep like that, so he must have moved next to me in the middle of the night. I started rubbing his back and he woke up and moved closer. It was our first time sharing a moment of intimacy and it was so beautiful. He left an hour later and sent me a text thanking me for treating him with love and respect. I did it. I can't begin to express how I feel. Today I messed up by agreeing to a trio with my best friend. I, 19 female, and my best friend Eva, 19 female, have been inseparable since 5th grade. Her and I are polar opposites. I'm mixed on the shorter side with brown eyes and hair, and a bit chunky, I'll admit. While Eva is white, blonde hair, green eyes with a lanky athletic build. She's very extroverted. I'm on the shyer side. She's the one that got all the boys' attention. I was the supportive best friend. I've always thought she was the most attractive girl I've had the pleasure of meeting. Earlier last week, Eva said she's been watching a lot of trio adult films and started having thoughts about being with another girl. I'm bisexual myself, and pretty shy when it comes to intimacy, as I only lost my virginity last year and have had one intimate partner since. Eva, again, is the exact opposite. She's been an intimate since her early teens and has been open about her intimate life. We have always joked about being gay for each other. We give each other a quick peck on the lips when we have to go after hanging out. And we even made a pact that if we're married by 30, we'll marry each other. So this led me to jokingly saying we should have a trio with someone to find out if she's bi or not. And she seriously agreed, which I obviously didn't turn down. We decided to make a Tinder account with both of us explaining how we just want someone, preferably a guy, as to her request, to join us, no strings attached. After finding a suitable match, we met up beforehand to explain the boundaries and rules we talked about. The next day would be when it all happened. For me, it was a great experience, and afterwards Eva agreed. Now, as much as me and Eva are opposite, one thing we absolutely do have in common is our taste in men. I don't want to sound pretentious, but I do feel the man paid a bit more attention to me than Eva. Later, the guy we were intimate with gave me his number afterwards while Eva was cleaning up in the bathroom. I thought he did the same with her. This is where it all falls apart. After the fact, she said she said no strings attached. But she wanted to see the guy again. I of course told her to go for it, but when she checked on Tinder to message him, he is unmatched and she wasn't too happy about. I just said to text him, and she said she didn't have his number. Confused, I said, well, he gave it to me. She got absolutely furious, saying how that was selfish and rude, that I was trying to keep him for myself, and I wanted too much attention from men. I tried to explain I thought he had also given her his number, but she wouldn't listen. We haven't had a fight this big ever. She hasn't called or texted me back since then. I feel like such a bad friend for letting a random person come between us like that. I will admit I did text the guy telling him the situation, and we have had a couple of conversations since. I just don't want 8 years of friendship going down the drain, especially if it's my fault.